My name is Hannah, and I'm 29. I'm sitting at my kitchen table in Portland, staring at a legal notice from my parents' lawyer. It says, I'm mentally unfit because I refuse to keep funding my brother Caleb's reckless dreams. My hands shake as I read it, memories of trying to please my family flooding back. They even brought up a childhood moment when I supposedly failed him. Why would they do this to me? Have you ever faced a family betrayal that shook your core? Share where you're watching from below, and please like and subscribe to hear how this unfolds. I paced my tiny Portland apartment, the legal notice still crumpled on the table. My phone felt heavy as I dialed my mom's number, hoping she'd explain this nightmare. Diane picked up on the third ring, her voice clipped. I asked about the letter, my words careful like stepping on thin ice. She sighed, heavy and impatient, and said I was tearing the family apart by refusing to help Caleb. I froze, my chest tightening. Help him? I'd already given him $5,000 last year for some vague business idea that crashed in months, leaving me scraping by to cover rent. I reminded her of that, my voice shaking, but she cut me off. Family sticks together, she said, and Caleb needs you more than you need your savings. I stared at the phone, her words sinking in like cold water. How could she twist it like that? I sank onto my couch, replaying the call. Growing up, I'd always been the responsible one, the one who fixed things. When I was 16, I'd skip art classes to watch Caleb while Mom and Dad worked late shifts. I didn't mind back then. He was my little brother, all wide eyes and goofy grins. But now, at 29, I saw the pattern. Caleb's charm always got him out of trouble while I was expected to clean up his messes. I pulled out my laptop, scrolling through old bank statements, my stomach churning as I saw the transfer to him. $5,000 gone, no repayment, no apology. I'd trusted him, believed his promises. That was my mistake. The next day, I drove to my parents' house, a small brick place on the edge of town. I hadn't been there in months, not since Caleb's last big fight with Dad over money. I thought maybe seeing Mom in person would make her hear me. The front door creaked as I stepped inside, the smell of her lavender candles hitting me like a memory. She was in the kitchen stirring soup, and Caleb lounged on the couch, scrolling his phone. No one looked surprised to see me. I sat across from Mom, trying to keep my voice steady. I told her I couldn't keep bailing Caleb out, that I had my own life, my own bills. She didn't look up from the pot. You've always been so independent, Hannah, she said, like it was a flaw. Caleb needs your support. It's what families do. I glanced at Caleb, hoping he'd say something, anything to back me up. He just smirked, not even looking up from his screen. I pushed harder, asking Mom why they thought I owed him my paycheck. She set the spoon down, her eyes narrowing. You promised to always look out for him, she said. When you were kids, you said you'd be there. My jaw dropped. That was a promise from a 12-year-old blurted out during a family camping trip when Caleb got lost in the woods. I'd felt guilty for not watching him closer, but I was a kid too. How could they hold that over me now? I noticed a photo album on the counter, open to a page of Caleb's high school soccer trophies. I flipped through it, my heart sinking. There wasn't a single picture of my college graduation, my art shows, or even my 25th birthday party. It was all Caleb, his prom, his first car, his gap year trip to Europe that Dad paid for. I closed the album, my throat tight. Mom kept talking, saying Caleb was going through a rough patch, that he deserved a chance. I wanted to scream that I was struggling too, that I'd worked overtime to afford my apartment, that I'd given up dreams to keep the peace. But the words stuck. At work the next morning, I could barely focus. My coworker, Elise, noticed her brow furrowing as she handed me coffee. She asked what was wrong, and I spilled a little, just enough to mention the letter and Mom's call. Elise leaned back, her eyes soft but serious. She told me about her own family, how her dad expected her to fund her sister's wedding while she was drowning in student loans. She said setting boundaries was the hardest but best thing she ever did. Her words stuck with me, a small spark in the fog. I wanted to believe I could do that too, but doubt gnawed at me. Was I being selfish? Was I the one breaking the family? Back home, I found an old letter tucked in a drawer written by my grandma before she passed. Her handwriting was shaky but clear, warning me about my parents' favoritism toward Caleb. She'd seen it even when I was too young to notice, urging me to stand up for myself. I'd brushed it off as a teenager, thinking she was just being dramatic. Now holding that letter, I felt a pang of regret. Why hadn't I listened? My phone buzzed a text from Mom. "Come over tomorrow. We need to talk about Caleb." I stared at the screen, my heart racing. Part of me wanted to go to fix this to make them see me. But another part, small but growing, wondered if I'd ever be enough for them. I sat on my couch, Grandma's letter still in my hand, the weight of Mom's text pressing on me. "Come over tomorrow. We need to talk about Caleb." My first instinct was to reply to agree to show up like always, but something stopped me. I set the phone down and walked to my bedroom, pulling out a box of old keepsakes. There was a drawing I'd made at 15, a sketch of our family at a picnic. I'd spent hours on it, hoping Dad would hang it up. He never did. I traced the lines, remembering how I'd felt invisible even then. The hurt was sharp, but it fueled a quiet resolve. I wasn't ready to face them yet. The next morning, I called in sick to work, needing space to think. I drove to a coffee shop across town, one Caleb never frequented. The barista, a guy named Lucas, recognized me from my occasional visits and slid an extra pastry my way with a smile. I thanked him, settling into a corner booth with my notebook. I started writing, trying to untangle my thoughts. Why did Mom think I owed Caleb everything? Why did I feel guilty for saying no? The words poured out messy and raw until I noticed Lucas glancing over, curious. I closed the notebook embarrassed, but he just nodded like he understood needing to hide. I spent hours there sipping coffee and staring at Mom's text. Part of me wanted to believe she'd listen if I explained things clearly. I typed a reply asking to meet somewhere neutral, maybe a park, just her and me. I hit send, my heart pounding. Her response came fast. "No, Hannah. At the house. Caleb needs to be there." My stomach dropped. It wasn't about understanding me. It was about rallying for him. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my notebook again, sketching the coffee shop's wooden beams, letting the pencil steady my nerves. Drawing always helped me think like a tether to something solid. When I got home, I checked my email, half hoping for an apology from Mom. Nothing, but there was a message from Elise asking how I was holding up. I called her, and she picked up right away, her voice warm. I told her about Mom's insistence on including Caleb, and she groaned. "That's classic," she said. "They make it about him to guilt you." She shared how her sister once crashed a family meeting to derail Elise's attempt at setting boundaries. It felt good to hear I wasn't alone, but it also scared me. Was this just how families worked, picking one kid to prop up while the other scrambled? I decided to go to my parents' house, not because I wanted to, but because I needed answers. The drive felt longer than usual, the familiar streets blurring past. When I pulled up, Dad's car was gone, but Caleb's beat-up sedan sat in the driveway. I knocked, and Mom opened the door, her face tight. She didn't hug me like she used to. Caleb was at the dining table eating a sandwich, acting like this was just another day. I sat across from him, my hands clasped to keep them still. I asked Mom why they thought I should keep paying for Caleb's mistakes. She crossed her arms, saying I was the stable one, the one who could handle it. "Caleb deserves a chance to get back on his feet," she said. "You're strong, Hannah. You don't need as much." Her words hit like a slap. Strong. I'd been strong when I worked 2 jobs to put myself through college. I'd been strong when I moved out at 21, scraping by in a studio apartment. But now, My strength was just an excuse to use me. I looked at Caleb, waiting for him to speak up. He leaned back, chewing slowly, then said, "You've always had it easy, Hannah. I'm just trying to catch up." Easy. I wanted to laugh. I'd clawed my way through every milestone while he coasted on charm and excuses. I asked him about the $5,000 point blank. He shrugged, saying it was a bad investment, like I should just let it go. Mom chimed in, saying I was making a big deal out of nothing. She pulled out a stack of bills from a drawer, all in Caleb's name. Credit cards, a car loan, even a gym membership he never used. "We're helping him with these," she said. "You could too." I stared at the papers, my vision blurring. They weren't just asking for a one-time loan. They wanted me to take on his entire life. I stood my chair, scraping the floor. I told them I needed time to think, my voice barely steady. Mom's eyes softened for a second, but she didn't stop me as I left. Outside, I leaned against my car, the cold air biting my cheeks. I felt like I was losing them, like every step toward protecting myself was a step away from the family I'd fought to keep close. My phone buzzed, a notification from a mutual friend's social media. It was a post from Caleb, a vague caption about family loyalty, with a photo of him and Mom smiling. The comments piled up, friends saying how sweet he was, how lucky we were to have each other. My throat tightened. He was already spinning the story, and I hadn't even figured out how to fight back. I drove home from my parents' house, Caleb's smug face and Mom's stack of his bills burning in my mind. My hands gripped the wheel knuckles white. I wanted to call Elise to vent, but my phone buzzed with another notification. Another post from Caleb this time, a selfie at a bar, captioned, "Family drama sucks, but I've got my people." Comments poured in, friends I'd known since high school, calling him the good guy, saying he deserved better. My stomach twisted. He was painting me as the villain, and they were buying it. Back at my apartment, I tossed my keys on the counter, the silence deafening. I opened my laptop, scrolling through the comments. People I'd laughed with at summer barbecues, people who'd crashed on my couch, were now liking Caleb's posts, some even adding heart-eyed emojis. I slammed the laptop shut, my chest heaving. How could they believe him? I'd always been there for them, always the one to listen, to help. But Caleb's charm was a magnet pulling everyone into his orbit, while I stood alone. The next morning, a letter arrived, slipped under my door. It was from my parents' lawyer, a formal demand for me to pay Caleb a monthly stipend, claiming it was my familial duty. The words blurred as I read, my pulse racing. They weren't just asking anymore. They were trying to force me. The letter ended with a chilling line. "Failure to comply may necessitate a review of your mental competency." I dropped it, my hands shaking. Competency. They were threatening to take away my freedom, my voice, all because I wouldn't bankroll Caleb's chaos. I called Marcus, my friend who used to practice law, my voice cracking as I read him the letter. He told me to meet him at a diner across town, somewhere quiet. When I got there, he was already in a booth, his glasses fogged from the coffee steam. He scanned the letter, his jaw tightening. "This is serious, Hannah," he said. "They're using scare tactics, but they could push for a hearing if you don't respond." He explained how they might twist my past like the therapy I'd done in college to cope with stress. I'd told Mom about it, trusting her. Now it felt like a weapon they could use against me. I leaned back, the diner's fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Therapy had been my lifeline, a place to sort through the pressure of being the perfect daughter. I'd never hidden it, but I'd never thought it could be used to call me unstable. Marcus scribbled notes saying we needed to gather proof of my stability, work records, bank statements, anything showing I was in control. His confidence steadied me, but the fear lingered. What if they convinced a judge I was the problem? At work, I tried to focus, but my designs looked flat, lifeless. Elise stopped by my desk, her eyes narrowing. "You look like you haven't slept," she said. I told her about the letter, keeping my voice low. She grabbed my hand, squeezing it. "They're trying to break you," she said. "Don't let them." Her words were fierce, but I felt fragile, like one wrong move would shatter me. I nodded, forcing a smile, but inside, I was reeling. My own parents, the people who'd taught me to tie my shoes, were ready to drag me through court to save Caleb. That night, I dug through old boxes, looking for anything to prove my case. I found a journal from my senior year of high school pages filled with plans for art school dreams I'd shelved to work full-time and help at home. One entry stopped me cold. I wrote about Mom and Dad using my college savings to pay off Caleb's first car loan. They'd promised to repay it, but they never did. I'd forgotten that pain buried it under years of trying to be the good daughter. Now it roared back raw and sharp. I sat on the floor, the journal open in my lap, tears stinging my eyes. They'd always chosen him even when it meant taking from me. I thought about calling Dad, asking why, but the memory of his silence at the house stopped me. He'd stood by while Mom laid out Caleb's bills, not once defending me. My phone lit up a text from a friend, Jenna, who'd commented on Caleb's post. "Saw your brother's update," she wrote. "You okay?" I stared at the words, my heart pounding. She was reaching out, but it felt too late. How could I explain this betrayal when everyone was already on his side? I stared at Jenna's text, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to pour it all out, to tell her how Caleb's posts were lies, how my parents were threatening my sanity. But the words wouldn't come. What if she didn't believe me? I set the phone down and paced my apartment, the walls feeling closer than ever. The journal lay open on the floor, its pages a reminder of how long I'd been sidelined for Caleb. I shoved it back into the box, my hands trembling with a mix of rage and helplessness. The next day, I met Marcus at his office, a cramped space filled with legal books and coffee mugs. He'd arranged a meeting with my parents' lawyer, Mr. Harris, to see if we could negotiate before things escalated further. I dressed carefully, choosing a blazer I'd worn to job interviews, hoping it would make me feel stronger. But as we walked into the lawyer's sleek downtown office, my confidence crumbled. Mr. Harris sat behind a mahogany desk, his smile thin and practiced. He didn't offer me a seat, so I stood clutching my purse like a shield. Marcus spoke first, calm but firm, asking why they were pushing for a competency hearing. Mr. Harris leaned back, his eyes flicking to me like I was a problem to be solved. "Your daughter's refusal to support her brother raises concerns about her judgment," he said. "We have evidence of erratic behavior, including her abrupt decision to cut off family contact." I opened my mouth to protest, but Marcus touched my arm, signaling me to stay quiet. Erratic, I'd stopped visiting because every conversation ended with them demanding money for Caleb. But the way Mr. Harris said it, smooth and certain, made me doubt myself. He slid a folder across the desk filled with documents. I caught glimpses of my name dates and phrases like emotional instability. My heart sank. They dug into my past, pulling out moments I'd shared in trust. Like the time I'd called Mom crying after a bad breakup, or when I'd vented about work stress. She'd been my confidant, or so I thought. Now those moments were twisted into proof I couldn't be trusted. Mr. Harris mentioned my therapy again, saying it showed a pattern of mental fragility. I wanted to scream that therapy was strength, not weakness, but my throat felt sealed shut. Marcus pushed back, asking for specifics, but Mr. Harris deflected, saying the details would come out in court. Court. The word landed like a stone. This wasn't just a threat anymore. It was real. As we left, Marcus promised to keep digging, but I barely heard him. My mind was spinning, replaying every conversation I'd ever had with Mom. Had she been collecting ammunition all along? I thought of her hugging me at Christmas, telling me she was proud. Was that a lie, too? Back at work, I kept my head down, but the tension followed me. My boss Carla asked me to redo a project I'd spent weeks on, saying it lacked focus. I nodded, biting my lip to keep from crying. I knew she was right. I couldn't concentrate. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mr. Harris's smirk, those documents Caleb's smug posts. During lunch, I checked my phone and saw another update from Caleb, this time a video of him at a family barbecue I hadn't been invited to. Mom was in the background laughing like nothing was wrong. The comments were brutal. "Where's Hannah? Guess she's too busy for family." My fork clattered to the table, drawing stares from coworkers. I excused myself to the bathroom, locking the stall and pressing my palms to my eyes. The betrayal wasn't just my parents anymore. It was everyone. Friends I'd trusted were cheering Caleb on, swallowing his half-truths. I thought about my high school best friend Tara, who'd left a comment calling Caleb inspiring. We'd stayed up late talking about our dreams, promising to have each other's backs. Now she was siding with him without even asking me. The loneliness was suffocating, like I was screaming into a void. That night, I lay awake, the ceiling fan clicking above me. I kept seeing Dad's face, wondering why he hadn't spoken up. He used to take me fishing when I was little, just the two of us, teaching me to cast a line. He'd called me his rock, said I was tougher than anyone. But now he was letting this happen, standing by while Mom and Caleb tore me apart. I curled into a ball, my chest aching. The worst part wasn't the lawyer or the posts. It was knowing the family I'd loved had already chosen sides, and I wasn't on it. No. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, its high ceilings amplifying every whisper. I sat in the front row, my blazer too tight, my hands clasped to hide their trembling. At 29, I'd never imagined facing my parents across a judge's bench, their lawyer ready to brand me unfit. Marcus sat beside me, his notepad filled with arguments, but my eyes were locked on Mom and Dad seated with Caleb a few rows back. They wouldn't look at me. Caleb slouched, picking at his nails like this was just another errand. Judge Thompson, a woman with sharp eyes and gray streaks in her hair, called the hearing to order. Her voice was steady, cutting through the room's tension. Mr. Harris stood adjusting his tie and began. He spoke of my refusal to support my brother as evidence of irrational behavior, his words dripping with false concern. I gripped the edge of my seat, my pulse hammering. He painted me as selfish, unstable someone who'd abandoned her family. Each sentence felt like a blade slicing deeper into the person I'd fought to become. Then he brought up my therapy, twisting it into something shameful. He said I'd sought help for severe anxiety, implying I couldn't handle life's pressures. My stomach lurched. I'd told Mom about those sessions years ago, sitting on her couch, tears in my eyes, trusting her to understand. I'd been juggling 2 jobs and night classes, barely sleeping. Therapy was my anchor, not a weakness. Now she'd handed those private moments to Mr. Harris, letting him weaponize them. I glanced at her, hoping for a flicker of regret, but her face was stone, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Marcus leaned over, whispering that we'd counter this, but I barely heard him. My mind flashed to a night in college when I'd called Mom after a session, feeling lighter, hopeful. She'd listened, said she was proud of me for taking care of myself. Had she been planning to use it against me even then? The betrayal burned hotter than anything Caleb had done. He was reckless, but Mom was supposed to be my safe place. I blinked back tears, forcing myself to focus as Mr. Harris called Caleb to the stand. Caleb swaggered up, his charm dialed up for the room. He wore a crisp shirt, probably borrowed, and spoke with a rehearsed sincerity that made my skin crawl. He told the judge I'd always been distant, unwilling to help him when he was struggling. He spun a story about a time I'd supposedly refused to lend him money for car repairs, leaving him stranded. It was a lie woven so smoothly, I almost doubted my own memory. I'd given him cash for that car, only to learn later he'd spent it on a weekend trip. My nails dug into my palms as he kept talking, piling on more half-truths. He said I'd cut him off without warning, ignoring his attempts to reconcile. The courtroom was silent, every word landing like a stone. I wanted to stand to shout that he'd never tried to fix anything, that he'd laughed when I asked for my money back. But Marcus's hand on my arm kept me still. Caleb's eyes flicked to me just for a second, and I saw it, a glint of satisfaction. He was enjoying this, tearing me down in front of everyone. Mr. Harris handed Caleb a photo, asking him to explain it. Caleb held it up, a picture from when I was 17, the four of us at a family reunion. He said it showed how I'd always been the caretaker, the one who kept him safe, but now he claimed I'd turned my back on that role. My breath caught as I recognized the photo. I'd been miserable that day, forced to watch Caleb while everyone else laughed and ate. In the picture, I was half hidden behind him, my smile forced. They were using my sacrifice as proof I owed him more. Judge Thompson leaned forward, her expression unreadable, and asked Caleb to clarify a date. He stumbled, his confidence cracking, but Mr. Harris smoothly redirected. I looked at Dad, willing him to meet my eyes to see what this was doing to me. He stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped. Mom adjusted her scarf, her movements jerky like she was fighting some inner battle. But neither of them spoke up. The room spun, my heart pounding so loud I thought everyone could hear it. This was it, the moment I'd feared my family. The people I'd loved most were trying to erase who I was. As Caleb stepped down, Mr. Harris called Mom to the stand. My heart stopped. She walked slowly, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, and settled into the witness chair with a stiffness I'd never seen. Her eyes darted to me for a split second, then away, like I was a stranger. Mr. Harris asked her to describe my behavior over the years, and she cleared her throat, her voice low but steady. She said I'd always been stubborn, quick to shut people out when things got hard. I gripped Marcus's arm, my nails digging in. Stubborn, I'd spent my life bending over backward for them. She went on, her words measured each one a fresh cut. She told the judge I'd grown distant, refusing to join family dinners, ignoring their calls. She didn't mention how those dinners always ended with demands for money, or how their calls were pleas for me to fix Caleb's latest mess. Instead, she painted a picture of a daughter who turned cold, ungrateful. My vision blurred, the courtroom lights too bright. I wanted to scream to make her stop, but my body felt glued to the seat. Mr. Harris handed her a document, asking her to read from it. My stomach dropped as she held up a letter I'd written to her years ago, when I was 22, living in my first apartment. I'd poured my heart out, confessing how overwhelmed I felt, how I was scared I'd never be enough for them. I'd mailed it after a fight, hoping it would bridge the gap between us. She'd called me the next day, promising to listen to change. Now she read it aloud, her voice flat, highlighting lines about my doubts, my fears, as proof I was unstable. The room spun. That letter was my most vulnerable moment, a plea for her love, and she was using it to bury me. The judge's pen scratched across her notepad, her face unreadable. Mom kept talking, saying my refusal to help Caleb was the final straw, a sign I'd lost touch with reality. She said they'd tried everything, but I was too far gone. I looked at Dad, desperate for him to intervene, but he sat rigid, his hands clenched in his lap. Caleb leaned back, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. The betrayal was a physical ache, like my ribs were cracking under the weight of it. Mr. Harris asked Mom about a specific incident, and she hesitated, then spoke. She brought up a night 2 years ago when I'd yelled at her during a family argument. I'd been exhausted, working overtime to cover my bills after lending Caleb money again. She'd pushed me to give him more, and I'd snapped, saying I couldn't keep carrying him. Now she twisted it, claiming I'd been unhinged, screaming without reason. The truth was, I'd cried myself to sleep that night, hating myself for raising my voice. But in her story, I was the monster, irrational and cruel. The courtroom was silent, every eye on me. I felt exposed, like my skin had been peeled back for everyone to judge. My boyfriend Ethan was in the back row, his face pale. We'd argued last night about this, hearing him questioning if I was blowing things out of proportion. Seeing him now, his eyes full of doubt, made my chest tighten. Even he wasn't sure of me anymore. I scanned the room, searching for a friendly face, but the few acquaintances there avoided my gaze, their heads bowed. Mr. Harris closed with a final question, asking Mom what she feared if I wasn't declared unfit. She looked straight at the judge, not at me, and said she was afraid I'd hurt myself, that my obsession with independence was a danger. The words hit like a punch, stealing my breath. Hurt myself? I'd spent years building a life, clawing my way through their expectations, and now she was calling it madness. Judge Thompson raised an eyebrow, jotting something down, but didn't speak. The silence was unbearable, every second stretching into eternity. I sank lower in my seat, my hands shaking so hard I hid them under the table. The room felt like it was closing in the air, too thick to breathe. My family had taken everything, my trust, my past, my truth, and laid it bare to destroy me. I wanted to run, to disappear, but there was nowhere to go. All I could do was sit there, drowning in the wreckage of who I thought they were. I left the courtroom in a daze, the echo of Mom's testimony ringing in my ears. My legs felt unsteady, like the ground might give way, but Marcus guided me to his car, promising we'd fight back. At 29, I'd never felt so small, yet something flickered inside me, a spark of defiance, faint but stubborn. I wasn't ready to let them win. Back at my apartment, I sank onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. The silence was heavy, but it gave me room to think. I couldn't just wait for the next hearing. I had to act. The next morning, I called Marcus, my voice steadier than I expected. He recommended a lawyer he knew, Ms. Carter, who specialized in family disputes. I met her at a small office near the library, her desk cluttered with case files and a half-eaten bagel. She was in her 50s, with a no-nonsense vibe and eyes that seemed to see right through me. I told her everything: the loans to Caleb, the legal notice, Mom's betrayal in court. She listened, jotting notes, then leaned forward. "They're bullying you, Hannah," she said. "But we can shut this down. You're not the one who's unstable." Her words lit a fire in me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had an ally who believed my truth. Ms. Carter laid out a plan: gather evidence of my stability and Caleb's irresponsibility, then build a case to dismiss the competency claim. I spent the afternoon at my kitchen table, sorting through years of bank statements. Every transfer to Caleb stung, hundreds here, thousands there, all while I'd skipped dinners to save for rent. I printed texts from Mom, her messages laced with guilt trips about family duty. Each piece was a brick in the wall I was building to protect myself. At work, I confided in Elise over lunch, keeping my voice low in the break room. She hugged me, saying I was stronger than I knew. Her support grounded me, but I couldn't shake Ethan's distance. He'd texted after the hearing asking to talk, but I wasn't ready. His doubts in the courtroom had hurt, and I needed to focus on myself. That night, I pulled out a box of old papers, searching for anything to bolster my case. I found a performance review from my boss, praising my reliability. It wasn't much, but it was proof I wasn't the mess they claimed. Ms. Carter suggested I confront Caleb directly, not to argue, but to demand he retract his lies. I hesitated, knowing he'd twist it, but she insisted it could show the judge I'd tried to resolve things. I drove to his apartment, a rundown place he shared with a roommate. He opened the door, shirt wrinkled, a beer in hand. I stood tall, my voice calm but firm, and asked him to tell the truth in court. He laughed, leaning against the doorframe. "Truth. You're the one who's lost it, Hannah, always playing the victim." My blood boiled, but I held my ground, saying his lies wouldn't hold up. He slammed the door, leaving me on the stoop, my heart racing. Back home, I sat at my desk, sketching to calm my nerves. The pencil moved on its own, tracing the outline of a tree, its roots deep and sprawling. I thought about my first job at 16, bagging groceries to save for art supplies. I'd learned then that I could build something from nothing, that I didn't need anyone's approval to survive. That girl was still in me, and she was done letting Caleb's chaos define her. I opened my laptop and started typing not a letter or a plea, but a record of every sacrifice I'd made for him. It wasn't for them, it was for me, a way to reclaim my story. By midnight, my desk was covered in papers, receipts, emails, even a note from my college advisor commending my work ethic. Each one felt like a step toward taking back my life. I thought about Ms. Carter's confidence, Elise's encouragement, and that spark inside me grew. I wasn't just fighting to win in court. I was fighting to prove to myself that I was enough. The next hearing was weeks away, but I felt a shift, like I was finally moving forward, not just running from their lies. The tree sketch lay unfinished on my desk, its roots sprawling like the strength I was starting to feel. I'd spent days gathering evidence, but it wasn't just about court anymore. It was about proving to myself I wasn't the failure they'd painted me as. At 29, I'd let my family's expectations cage me for too long. That ended now. I opened my laptop again, my fingers steady, and started a new document. Not for the judge, not for Ms. Carter, but for me. A timeline of every moment I'd put Caleb first, every sacrifice I'd made to keep the peace. I wrote about the summer I'd skipped a design internship to drive Caleb to his part-time job because Mom said he needed me. I wrote about the nights I'd stayed up balancing my budget to cover his loans while he partied with friends. Each sentence was a weight lifted, a truth I'd buried under guilt. By dawn, I had pages of raw honesty, and for the first time I saw my story clearly. I wasn't selfish. I'd given too much. The realization burned, but it also freed me. At the library the next day, I met Ms. Carter to review our strategy. She flipped through my evidence bank records, texts my work reviews, nodding with approval. "You're building a fortress, Hannah," she said, her voice warm but firm. But she pushed me to go further, suggesting I request a financial audit of Caleb's spending. If we could show his pattern of waste, it might weaken their case. I hesitated, knowing it would enrage my parents, but her steady gaze held mine. "You're not just defending yourself," she said. "You're setting a precedent for your life." I nodded, my resolve hardening. I signed the paperwork, my hand steady. Back at work, I took a risk. I pitched a new project to Carla, a branding campaign I'd been sketching in secret for months. It was bold, something I'd held back because I doubted myself. But standing in her office, I spoke with a confidence I hadn't felt in years. She raised an eyebrow, impressed, and asked for a full proposal by next week. Walking back to my desk, I felt a surge of pride. This wasn't just about work. It was about reclaiming the parts of me I'd let my family dim. Ethan called that evening, his voice tentative. He wanted to meet to apologize for his doubts at the hearing. I agreed, but not at my place. We met at a quiet park, the air crisp with early fall. He sat on a bench, looking worn, and admitted he'd been overwhelmed, unsure how to handle my family's attack. I listened, my arms crossed, but I didn't let him off easy. I told him I needed someone who'd stand by me, not question me when things got hard. His eyes dropped, and he nodded, promising to do better. I didn't fully trust him yet, but I felt stronger for saying it out loud. I was done shrinking to make others comfortable. Inspired by Elise's encouragement, I took another step. I started a blog, anonymous for now, titled Breaking the Cycle. I wrote about family pressure, about giving until you're empty, pouring out my story without naming names. The first post was short, just a reflection on learning to say no. I hit publish, my heart pounding, and watched as a few readers found it. A stranger left a comment saying they'd felt the same, trapped by their parents' demands. That small connection from someone I'd never met felt like a lifeline. The next day, I visited my old art studio, a place I hadn't been to in years. I'd stopped painting when Caleb's needs took over. But now, I needed to reconnect with that part of myself. I rented a small corner, setting up a canvas with no plan, just letting the brush move. The colors were messy bold, nothing like the careful designs I did for work. It felt like breathing again. As I painted, I thought about Ms. Carter's words about setting a precedent. This wasn't just about the hearing, it was about who I'd be after. By the weekend, I'd compiled a full dossier for Miss Carter, emails from colleagues praising my work, a letter from my landlord confirming I'd never missed rent, even a photo of my latest sketch proof I was creating again. Each piece was a reminder of who I was outside their lies. I stood in my apartment, the papers spread across the table, and felt a quiet power settle in my chest. I wasn't just fighting for my freedom. I was fighting for the life I deserved. I picked up my phone, opened the blog, and started a new post. My fingers paused over the keys, then I typed a single sentence. I am enough. I didn't publish it yet. Instead, I closed the laptop, stood in the silence, and let those words sink into me. I stood in the courtroom again, the air thick with anticipation, my dossier of evidence tucked under Ms. Carter's arm. At 29, I'd never felt so exposed, yet so certain. The judge's gavel struck, calling the session to order, and I braced myself. Ms. Carter rose, her voice clear as she presented our case. She laid out my bank records showing every dollar I'd given Caleb unpaid and unacknowledged. She read texts from Mom, each one a demand cloaked in guilt. My work reviews came next, proof I was steady capable. I watched the judge's pen move her face, giving nothing away. Mr. Harris shifted in his seat, his usual smirk gone. Ms. Carter didn't stop. She submitted a financial audit we'd requested detailing Caleb's spending, bar tabs, concert tickets, a motorcycle he'd crashed within a month. The numbers were stark, undeniable, a map of his recklessness. I glanced at Caleb, expecting defiance, but he stared at his hands, his jaw tight. Mom's scarf was knotted too tightly around her neck, her fingers twisting the fabric. Dad's eyes were fixed on the floor, unblinking. Ms. Carter called a witness, my boss Carla, who testified about my reliability at work, describing the branding campaign I'd pitched. Her praise was simple but firm, a counterpoint to the chaos my family claimed I was. The judge nodded, jotting notes, and I felt a flicker of hope, fragile but real. Then Ms. Carter mentioned my blog, Breaking the Cycle, reading a post where I'd written about learning to value myself. She argued it showed clarity, not instability. Mr. Harris objected, calling it irrelevant, but the judge overruled, her voice sharp. I hadn't expected the blog to matter here, and my chest tightened with a strange mix of pride and vulnerability. The room grew quieter as Ms. Carter closed her argument, asking the judge to dismiss the competency claim. She said my family's actions were not about concern, but control, and attempt to force my compliance. The words hung in the air, heavy and true. I looked at Mom, hoping for a crack in her resolve, but her face was pale, her lips pressed thin. Caleb slumped lower, his charm useless now. Dad's hands were clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. Their silence was louder than any defense they could have offered. Judge Thompson leaned forward, her gaze sweeping the room. She asked Mr. Harris to respond, but his voice faltered, his arguments thin against the weight of our evidence. He tried to pivot, claiming my family only wanted to protect me, but the judge cut him off, asking for specifics he couldn't provide. The shift was palpable, like the air had changed. I'd spent weeks building this case, pouring my truth into every page, and now it was unraveling their lies in real time. Outside during a recess, I stood by a window, the Portland skyline gray and muted. Marcus clapped my shoulder, saying we'd done well, but I barely nodded. The victory felt hollow when I saw Mom and Dad in the hallway whispering to Mr. Harris, their faces drawn. Caleb was nowhere in sight, likely hiding from the mess he'd made. I wanted to feel triumphant, but all I felt was the ache of what I'd lost. They hadn't just attacked my freedom, they'd rewritten my life to fit their story. And yet here I was, standing my ground. Back inside, the judge began her ruling. Her voice measured. She dismissed the competency claims, citing insufficient evidence and praising the strength of my defense. She warned my parents about the consequences of frivolous lawsuits, her tone firm. I exhaled, my shoulders loosening, but the relief was bittersweet. Mom's eyes widened, her hand gripping Dad's arm. Dad stared straight ahead, his face ashen like he'd seen a ghost. Caleb reappeared, slipping into the back row, but he didn't look at me. The courtroom was still, the weight of the moment pressing down on us all. I sat frozen, the judge's words echoing in my mind. I'd won, but the cost was carved into the faces across the room. My family, the ones I'd once run to, were strangers, now their plan in ruins. I wanted to feel free, but the silence between us was a wall, cold and unyielding, and I didn't know how to cross it. The courtroom cleared, but I stayed seated, my hands folded in my lap, the judge's ruling still sinking in. Ms. Carter gathered her papers, her smile brief but proud. I nodded my thanks, but my eyes drifted to the empty seats where Mom, Dad, and Caleb had been. They'd left without a word, their absence louder than any argument. At 29, I'd won my freedom, but the victory tasted like ash. I'd fought to be seen, and now I was alone in a room that had held my truth. Outside, the air was damp, Portland's gray sky pressing low. I walked to my car, Marcus at my side, his quiet presence steadying me. He said we'd done the impossible, but I only half listened. My mind was on Mom's pale face, Dad's averted eyes, Caleb's hurried exit. I'd expected anger, maybe accusations, but their silence cut deeper. It was as if I'd vanished from their story, a ghost they couldn't face. At home, I found a voicemail from Elise, her voice bright, insisting we celebrate. I met her at a small bar near work where she'd rallied a few coworkers. They raised glasses, calling me a badass, but I felt detached, like I was watching someone else's life. Elise pulled me aside, her eyes searching mine. "You did it, Hannah," she said. "You're free." I forced a smile, but the word free felt wrong. Free from their control, maybe, but not from the ache of losing them. Later, I checked my blog expecting nothing, but there were new comments, dozens of them from strangers who'd read my posts. One woman wrote about her sister draining her savings, another about parents who chose her brother over her. Their words mirrored my pain, and for a moment I didn't feel so alone. I replied to each one, my fingers slow, thanking them for sharing. It wasn't much, but it was a thread connecting me to something bigger than my family's rejection. Ethan came over that night, his apology softer this time, more certain. He admitted he'd been scared not of me, but of losing me to this fight. I listened, my arms crossed, but let him stay. We sat on my couch, not touching, just talking. He promised to show up to be better. I wanted to believe him, but trust was a fragile thing now. Still, his effort was a small warmth, a reminder I wasn't entirely adrift. The next day, I got a text from a number I didn't know. It was Lily, a cousin I hadn't seen since we were kids. She'd found my blog through a friend and recognized my story. She wrote about her own run-ins with my parents, how they'd pressured her to fund Caleb's schemes years ago. Her words were careful, but the pain was clear. She asked to meet, and I agreed, surprised by the relief I felt. Someone else had seen their favoritism, had carried the same weight. It wasn't just me. At work, Carla called me into her office. The branding campaign I'd pitched had been approved, and she wanted me to lead it. Her trust, so different from my family's accusations, settled something in me. I spent the afternoon sketching ideas, each line a small act of creation, a way to rebuild what they'd tried to break. But even as I worked, my thoughts drifted to Dad. I remembered a Sunday when I was 10 helping him fix a leaky pipe under the sink. He'd called me his problem solver, his voice full of pride. Where was that man now? That evening I walked to the mailbox, half expecting another legal notice. Instead, there was a plain envelope, no return address. Inside was a single photo, one I'd never seen me at 5 sitting on Grandma's porch, her arm around me. On the back in her shaky handwriting was a note, "You're stronger than they know." I held it, my throat tight. It was Lily's doing. I was sure a gift from someone who understood. I tucked it into my pocket, the paper warm against my fingers. I stood in the dim light of my apartment, the photo on my table, Grandma's words staring up at me. I'd won in court, but the cost was a family I couldn't recognize. Mom's scarf, Dad's clenched hands, Caleb's smirk. They haunted me, not as people, but as shadows of what we'd been. I wanted to hate them to let go. But all I felt was a quiet sorrow, heavy and unyielding, settling into the spaces they'd left behind. A soft breeze rustled the leaves in the park near my apartment, the kind of Sunday morning that felt like a gift. At 29, I was learning to cherish these quiet moments, the ones where the world didn't demand anything from me. I sat on a bench, my sketchbook open pencil tracing the curve of an oak tree's branches. The lines were loose, unhurried, a far cry from the tense designs I'd churned out during the court battle. I wasn't drawing to prove anything, just to feel the paper under my hand, to exist without weight. The park was alive with small sounds, kids laughing, a dog barking jogger's sneakers crunching gravel. I closed my eyes, letting it wash over me. For months, my life had been a storm, lawyers' evidence, the sting of my family's betrayal. But here, with the sun warming my face, I could breathe. I thought about the girl I'd been always rushing to fix things, to earn love that never came. She was still part of me, but I was teaching her to rest. I opened my sketchbook again, flipping to a blank page. I started drawing the park's fountain, its water catching the light in tiny sparks. As a kid, I'd loved fountains, tossing pennies and making wishes I never told anyone. I hadn't thought about that in years, but now sketching the stone basin, I wondered what I'd wish for today. Not for my parents to change that hope had faded. Maybe for peace, the kind that didn't depend on them. The thought felt new, fragile, but right. My phone buzzed a text from Lily, my cousin who'd reached out after the hearing. She was in town and wanted to grab coffee. I smiled, tucking the sketchbook into my bag. We met at a small cafe, its walls lined with local art. Lily was taller than I remembered, her dark hair pulled back, her eyes carrying a quiet strength. Over lattes, we talked about her life in Seattle, her work as a nurse, the way she'd carved out a space for herself despite our family's pressures. She mentioned a time when Mom had called her asking for money to cover Caleb's rent and how she'd said no. I leaned forward, hungry for her story, for proof I wasn't alone. She pulled out a small envelope, sliding it across the table. Inside was another note from Grandma written years ago, when Lily was a teenager. It was short, urging her to hold her ground, to not let anyone dim her light. I read it twice, my fingers tracing the ink. Grandma had seen it all, the way Mom and Dad poured everything into Caleb, leaving the rest of us to fend for ourselves. Lily's voice softened, saying she wished she'd known me better back then, that we could have faced it together. I knotted my throat tight, but the warmth of her words settled deep. We walked back to the park, the afternoon light golden now. Lily pointed out a bird nesting in a low branch, its movements quick and precise. We stood there watching, not needing to fill the silence. For the first time in years, I felt a connection to family that didn't hurt, one built on shared truth instead of obligation. As we parted, she hugged me, promising to visit again. I watched her go, the envelope still in my pocket. Grandma's words, a quiet anchor. Back at my apartment, I set up a new corner for my sketches, a small table by the window. I hung a string of lights above it, their soft glow making the space feel mine. I placed Grandma's photo, the one of us on her porch, next to a fresh canvas. I didn't paint yet, just sat there, letting the stillness wrap around me. The fight with my family had left scars. But this moment, this tiny act of claiming space, was a step toward healing. I wasn't whole, but I was here, and that was enough for now. The late afternoon light slanted through my apartment window, casting shadows on the new table where my sketches lay. I sat with a mug of tea, the steam curling upward, and let my mind wander. At 29, I was starting to understand what it meant to live for myself, not for the approval I'd chased my whole life. The fight with my family had carved out a space in me raw but clean, and I was learning to fill it with things that felt true. I opened my laptop, the blog's dashboard glowing on the screen. Breaking the Cycle had grown its quiet corner of the internet, now a place where others shared their stories. A new comment caught my eye from someone named Claire, who wrote about cutting ties with her parents after years of guilt. Her words were simple, but they hit me hard. I'm learning to be okay with not fixing them. I typed a reply thanking her, my fingers pausing as I realized I was learning the same. I didn't need to mend my family. I needed to mend me. I stood and walked to the small shelf where I kept Grandma's things. The photo of us on her porch sat beside a clay pot she'd made its edges worn but sturdy. I ran my thumb over it, remembering her hands kneading dough in her kitchen, her voice telling me to stand tall. She'd known what it was to love people who couldn't love you back the way you deserved. I'd spent so long angry at Mom and Dad at Caleb, but now holding that pot, I felt the anger soften, not gone, but quieter. I didn't have to forgive them to move on. My phone buzzed a voicemail from Mom. I hesitated, my heart skipping, then played it. Her voice was low, halting, saying she'd seen my blog, that she didn't understand why things had turned out this way. No apology, no real regret, just a plea for me to call. I set the phone down, staring at it. A month ago, I'd have dialed her number, desperate to explain. Now, I let the silence sit. I wasn't ready to answer, maybe never would be. And that was okay. I grabbed my coat and walked to the corner store, the one with the flickering neon sign. The clerk, an older man named Sam, nodded as I picked up a loaf of bread and some flowers daisies in a plastic wrap. Back home, I set the flowers in a glass jar on my sketch table, their white petals bright against the wood. I didn't know why I'd bought them, but they felt like a promise, a small act of care for the life I was building. I sliced the bread, the knife steady in my hand, and ate a piece plain, the taste grounding me. Later, I called Lily, needing her voice after Mom's message. We talked about small things, her new apartment, a patient she'd helped at work. She mentioned a letter she'd found in Grandma's old recipe box, one written to both of us, urging us to find our own paths. Lily promised to send me a copy, her laugh soft through the phone. Hanging up, I felt a warmth I hadn't expected, a tide of family that didn't demand my soul. I stepped onto my balcony, the city humming below. The air was cool, carrying the scent of rain. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to be enough for Mom, for Dad, for Caleb. I'd measured my worth by their approval, bending until I broke. Now, standing here, I saw it differently. I wasn't whole yet, but I was enough for me. The thought settled like a stone in a river, steady and sure. I went back inside the daisies, catching the last of the light. I sat at my table, not sketching, not writing, just being. The world outside kept moving, but in this moment, I was still. My heart, once a tangle of hurt, was quieter now, not healed, but resting. I looked at Grandma's photo, her smile faint but clear, and felt her strength in me. I was ready to keep going, not for them, but for the woman I was becoming. A year had passed since the courtroom, and I was 30 now, standing in my apartment with morning light spilling through the curtains. The space felt different, not just because of the new rug or the plants I'd started tending. It was me. I'd changed, not in loud ways, but in the quiet ones that matter. I brewed coffee, the slow drip, a ritual I'd come to love, and sat by the window watching the street wake up. Portland's hum was familiar, but I heard it differently now, like a song I'd finally learned the words to. I'd kept my sketch table, but it was messier, covered with half-finished drawings and watercolor experiments. I painted most evenings, not for work, but for the way it steadied my hands, my heart. One canvas, a swirl of blues and greens, hung above my couch. My first piece in years I hadn't second-guessed. I'd stopped measuring my worth by perfection, a habit I'd carried too long. Instead, I let the colors bleed, let myself be imperfect, and found joy in the mess. Work had shifted too. The branding campaign I'd led won a small award, and Carla promoted me to senior designer. I walked into meetings with a confidence that wasn't forced, speaking up without fear of being wrong. My colleagues noticed some joking I'd found a secret superpower. I just smiled, knowing the truth I'd found myself. The late nights at the office were fewer now. I left on time most days, valuing the hours I could spend living, not proving. Lily and I talked weekly, our calls a bridge to a family I'd chosen. She'd sent me Grandma's letter, the one written to us both, and I kept it in a wooden box with her old recipes. Sometimes I'd read it, tracing her advice to live boldly and feel her strength in me. Lily was coming to visit soon, and we'd planned a hike, something we'd never done as kids. The thought of her laughter, unburdened by old expectations, made me lighter. I still checked my blog, though I posted less often. Breaking the Cycle had grown into a small community, people sharing stories of boundaries and healing. I read every comment, moved by their courage. One reader, a man named Tom, wrote about leaving his toxic job after years of pressure from his dad. His words reminded me how universal this fight was, how we all carried invisible weights. I replied, encouraging him, and felt a quiet pride in being part of their journeys. Ethan and I were navigating things slower now. We'd had hard talks, rebuilding trust, one conversation at a time. He showed up in ways he hadn't before, like cooking dinner when I worked late, or listening without trying to fix me. I wasn't sure where we'd end up, but I liked that I didn't need to know. I was learning to love without clinging, to let things unfold without forcing them. One morning, I found a letter in my mailbox, Dad's handwriting on the envelope. My stomach tightened, but I opened it, standing in the hallway. It was short, his words careful, saying he regretted how things turned out, that he missed me. No real apology, just a wish to talk. I folded it, slipping it into a drawer. I didn't feel anger, just a calm distance. I'd spent so long craving his approval, but now I saw him as a man flawed, stuck in his own story. I didn't call. I didn't need to. I started walking to a nearby bakery on weekends, a place with mismatched chairs and the best scones. The owner, a woman named Ruth, always saved me a blueberry one. We'd chat about small things, weather books, the city's quirks. Those moments, simple and unforced, were a kind of healing. I wasn't running from my past anymore. I was building a present, one scone, one sketch, one breath at a time. I sat on my balcony that evening, a blanket over my knees, the city's lights flickering below. The weight of the past year hadn't vanished, but it was lighter, like a stone smoothed by a river. I'd fought for my truth, and though I'd lost a family, I'd found a life. I looked at the stars, faint against the city glow, and felt a stillness settle in me, a peace I'd earned, one I'd carry forward. The community center smelled of fresh paint and coffee, its folding chairs arranged in a circle for the storytelling event I'd planned. I stood at the front, my hands steady, wearing Grandma's old silver necklace, its weight a quiet comfort. At 30, I was no stranger to fear, but this was different. I was here to share my story, not to prove it, but to let it breathe. The room filled slowly strangers and a few blog readers, their faces open curious. I took a breath, my voice soft but clear, and began. I spoke of the years I'd spent carrying my family's expectations of the courtroom, where I'd fought to be seen, of the silence that followed. I didn't linger on the pain, but on what came after, the slow work of rebuilding, the choice to let go without hating. The audience listened, some nodding, others wiping their eyes. A young woman, Sarah, raised her hand when I finished. Her voice shook as she shared her own story about a mother who demanded everything, leaving her empty. She thanked me, saying my words gave her courage to set boundaries. I smiled, my chest tight, seeing my younger self in her. Others spoke their stories, weaving a tapestry of resilience, a man who'd walked away from a controlling brother, a woman who'd rebuilt her life after a toxic marriage. Each voice was a thread connecting us in ways I hadn't expected. I sat among them, no longer the leader, just one of many. As the event ended, I noticed two figures slip out the back. I caught a glimpse of Mom's coat, Dad's familiar slouch. They'd come, listened, and left without a word. I waited for the old ache to flare, but it didn't. Their presence was a whisper, not a weight. I let it pass. That night, I walked home under a sky heavy with clouds, the city's pulse steady around me. I thought about Sarah, about the others, about the paths we'd all carved through pain. I'd learned something in that room, something I hadn't fully grasped until now. Freedom wasn't just saying no to others, it was saying yes to myself. Not in grand gestures, but in small ones, buying flowers, painting without fear, choosing who I let close. I'd spent so long believing love meant sacrifice that my worth lay in what I gave. Now I knew it lay in what I chose to keep. I stopped at a bridge over the river, its water dark and slow. I leaned on the railing, the metal cool under my palms. The girl who'd begged for her family's approval was gone, not erased, but transformed. She'd taught me to fight, but I'd taught her to rest. I didn't need to carry their choices anymore, didn't need to fix what they'd broken. I could love them from a distance, with a heart that was finally my own. That was the lesson, hard won and simple. I was enough, not because I won, but because I chose to be. At home, I lit a candle, its flicker soft against the dark. I opened my blog and wrote a final post, not about the past, but about the future. I urged readers to find one thing, however small, that made them feel whole, and to hold it tight. I didn't check for comments, didn't need the validation. I closed the laptop, the candle's glow steady, and sat in the quiet hole in a way I'd never been. What's one moment that made you feel truly free? Share it below. I'd love to hear your story. If this resonated, please like, subscribe, or share it with someone who might need it. Your support means more than you know. Thank you for listening, for being here. Here's to healing, to choosing ourselves, and to the journeys we're all on. Take care.